And welcome to today's edition of Dr. Carol's Couch. I'm your psychiatrist host, Dr. Carole Lieberman. Well, have I got a great guest for you? um, Stacy Washington, I'll tell you all about her. Today, the show is China and Russia and Iran, oh my, how to be happy in a dangerous world. A world that's now less dangerous because of our new president, President Trump. Every time we look up, there seems to be a new enemy threatening America. What is someone to do who wants to have just a calm, peaceful, fun life with a sense of purpose, loved ones, and spirituality? China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and others are rattling their sabers, threatening war. But fortunately, we have a new president, 100 days in office so far. And already the perception of the world has changed. There's more respect for America, not just because everyone knows Trump is tough, but because they know he has a moral compass, a sense of right and wrong that guides him. So now let me introduce my guest, Stacy Washington. First of all, I'm honored that Stacy is on my show. I've been on her show a bunch of times, and it is always fun. It's like we're having coffee outside somewhere, and but talking about really, really serious stuff. It's a great combination. Let me tell you about her. She is the host of the nationally syndicated Sirius XM Radio Show, Stacy on the Right. And she is also the host of a television show. And she is, some of these descriptions I actually didn't know. For example, I didn't know that she was a decorated Air Force veteran. While serving in active duty, she was awarded the Air Force Achievement Medal, Air Force Training Ribbon, National Defense Service Medal, Humanitarian Service Medal, Air Force Outstanding Unit Award, and the Air Force Good Conduct Medal. It's a good thing there weren't any more. We'd be done with the show. In addition to this, she served as co-chair, and I didn't know this either, co-chair of Black Voices for Trump. She's a board member of Veterans for Trump and the co-chairman of the Project 21 National Advisory Council of the National Center for Public Policy. And there's a whole bunch more, but I will maybe save that for later. She's also the author of a wonderful book called Eternally Cancel Proof. It's a great title. Eternally Cancel Proof, a guide for courageous Christians navigating the political battlefront. So, Stacy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dr. Carole. Thanks for having me on.
Where would you like to start? I know originally we were thinking of talking about China, and then now we're kind of going to Trump. That's why I sort of led into that by saying that now the world, or at least our world, America, is a safer place now that he's been elected. So would you like to start with that?
Yeah, I think it's actually really fitting for us to talk about some of the changes that President Trump has been able to execute on since he was inaugurated on January 20th. I kind of feel like that January 20th, it seems like it was like 6 months ago, but I know it wasn't.
Were you at the inauguration?
No, I wasn't. I was covering it on radio and on television, but no, I didn't travel there. I couldn't brave the cold again. I don't know. I felt like it wasn't my year to head to DC for the inauguration, but I enjoyed the festivities and I'm glad I didn't go because I wouldn't have been one of the 500 or so people who made it inside of the rotunda there. They moved everything indoors.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
I was there. I was in the rotunda.
Well, that is fantastic, and I'm glad you have that kind of access. But I had a couple that we know really well. They're good friends. They traveled, and they were expecting to be really close up in the stands, but they did not make the cutoff to get into the rotunda, and so they were kind of upset that they traveled and didn't get in because of the change. But I think that the bigger deal for us with President Trump is that he is what you see is what you get. He's that wrecking ball we hired to go to DC and fire bureaucrats, close up agencies, and really to start something that we've been promised since the Tea Party years and even before that, and that's rooting out the corruption and the fraud. And so I I think his favorite accomplishment for me so far in the first 100 days is him reducing inflation to 1%, when I was told by very, very esteemed economists on radio that we wouldn't be able to see any movement on inflation until the end of 2025, maybe first or second quarter of 2026. Here we are, one quarter into 25, and inflation is at 1%. Anything below 1.9% is effectively zero, according to the Fed. So that's an amazing accomplishment. It means everything is cheaper. And I was just at the gas station yesterday and I was filling up my daughter's car, actually. I borrowed her car to go to the dermatologist, and her car was on a quarter of a tank. And I'm like, oh, let me bless her as her mom. So she's in college. So I took her car ran it through the car wash and filled it up, expecting it to be about $20 more. Now, I know that the prices have steadily been going down, and I actually haven't been driving a lot and pumping gas a lot, but it was still so much less than the last time she and I were at the gas station together filling up her car. And so that's a huge boom for regular Americans who really, Americans who live on a budget, Americans who, have to cash a paycheck or check their direct deposit every couple of weeks, and they're saving towards goals and aspirations, and they're living the American dream, but they're not worth $400 million like some of the Democrat supporters who are so vocally against President Trump. So I that's my favorite, but he has a long list of accomplishments so far just in 100 days. I think he's doing really well. And I'm happy for him because, they only tried to kill him to keep him from going back to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. So it's really great that he's back.
Yes, absolutely. I'm not sure what my favorite, well, I think one of my favorites is what he's doing with immigration. Because, they are really, I mean, it's so tough, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this, how everything he wants to do and has promised to do, during his campaign, people are coming out from the woodwork, all sides, trying to stop it, whether it's immigration, whether it's the tariffs. Now everybody's up in arms about the tariffs. I don't go near the tariffs because I don't understand any of that. So, but they'll find anything that he does, that he had promised to do, and try to stop it. And it really kind of makes him stronger. The more that people push back at him, the more he's determined to make these things happen.
So I got to tell you, and one of the most interesting things to me about all of this is, well, number one, the media gave him 96% negative coverage in the first term, about 98% negative coverage while he was out of office, and now he's back in office, and they're still in the mid to high 90s of just negative coverage. But the tariffs especially has been interesting because tariffs are not a left-right issue. They are actually a do you earn money and want to spend it issue. So that's all Americans. And over 100 years ago, our government was much smaller, obviously, and also almost fully funded by tariffs that we levied on other countries. Now we have the biggest economy, and we basically subsidize all of the other economies, especially Canada. But all of the other, even China, we borrow money from China and then we subsidize their economy. If we just zeroed all of that out and said, let's start over again, which is what President Trump is proposing, we wouldn't have to collect so much in tax from Americans who work the first quarter of every year to pay their federal tax burden. And then what about all of the other taxes we pay? Here in Missouri, we pay a gas tax, which I think most states have that. We
Yeah.
have property tax, which goes to fund schools that
Yeah.
my kids, only attended until fifth grade, and then we put them into private school, so we paid twice. And it's a tax on everything. And if it's not a tax, it's a license. We even have to pay property taxes on our homes after we finish paying off our mortgages, which means the property tax is like a ownership. They own your house if you decide not to
Uh-huh.
pay property tax. So when he talks about reducing taxes, and in any place, whatever tax he's wanting to reduce, I'm listening because I feel like there's an entitlement. Government workers feel they are owed and have the right to demand money from Americans and to demand more and more. Like what they do here in Missouri, they shuttered the entire economy in St. Louis County for COVID, and then they decided, well, you know what? We didn't collect enough tax because, businesses were closed and businesses provide tax revenue. So we'll just make the land underneath all of the commercial and residential buildings, all of the land will be more valuable. And so they hiked up the value of the land and increased our taxes the year after.
Oh,
And I knew
wow.
it was coming because they didn't collect enough tax revenue. So then when everyone complained and went to the legislature, this is a Hancock violation, yada, 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 then they lowered the value of the home, the land tax, jacked up the price of the home taxes and said, there's been a housing shortage. So now all
Oh,
the houses are worth more. Well, that's unrealized capital gains. If you're not selling your house, it doesn't matter what it's worth. What
yeah.
matters is how much they're charging you in tax because that comes off of your disposable income. So I'm sick of it. And to hear President Trump talk about the tariffs, and it's a short-term amount of pain to bring some of the 90,000 factories that we lost because of NAFTA, 90,000 factories left these shores. We
Wow.
need some of those back. I was the same, Dr. Carole, when I learned that there were 90,000 factories that were eliminated, I thought, I'm always amazed by the size, scope, and scale of America. That we could have 90,000 factories go away and we're still the biggest economy, still
Uh-huh.
have the highest
Uh-huh.
GDP per capita. We are a economic powerhouse. We're the hardest working people on the planet. And I don't consider the Chinese people to be our competition because the CCP owns their populace. They actually work their citizens as slaves.
Right.
Here in America, we're free and we're the hardest working. And I think that distinction is one with a purpose. And so I'm really hopeful that Americans can kind of sift through the noise and understand just how groundbreaking and wonderful it is to have a president who wants to have our revenue, our hard work, our effort, the things that we produce be the source of the funding of the government, a smaller government that's more efficient, and not have taxpayers constantly, paying in. Every year we collect a record amount of taxes and it's still not enough. We're borrowing 2 trillion a year on a 6.7 trillion dollar budget. We need to reduce our budget by 2 trillion. And I believe we could do it with Doge and with new income like the sovereign wealth fund and the Trump gold cards, but the media and the organized judicial activism is putting the kibosh on what is an amazing plan. So we really have to be supporting. We have to call our congressmen, call our senators, and tell them to support the Trump agenda, to get these activist judges out of the way, to get people who are in the country illegally out of the way, because that's another $300 billion a year that we're spending on people who are not paying into our taxes. They're collecting Social Security, they're voting. These people should not be here. They're a drain on our economy and our economic resources. And so we just have to be better at managing the absolute, it's like the most luxe thing you can have in the world, which is citizenship in America. We've got to manage it better because it's being squandered right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the things I want to ask you is, it's just something I've never really understood. So we have borrowed all this money from China. So couldn't China, like tomorrow, um, say we want you will have to pay us back now, or else we're gonna attack you or something. Why haven't they called in their chips?
Well, because we are the number one purchaser of their goods and services. So without the United States, China doesn't have anyone to sell their stuff to. And my favorite example of this, Dr. Carroll, is currently there's a manufacturer in China who is holding on to, he doesn't want to, but he has them, 100,000 lightsabers. They're toy lightsabers. But they're kind
Wait,
of like the fancier versions of lightsabers.
light lightsabers?
Lightsabers. They're
Oh,
um,
sabers.
from Star Wars. And
Oh, yeah.
so he has them manufactured because they were on order from the United States. But if he doesn't ship those here and fulfill that order here, where he's paid for shipping that stuff here into one of our ports, there's not another 100,000 people on the planet who want 100,000 lightsabers. And remember, in America, like my household, if we were buying lightsabers, we wouldn't buy one, we would buy five because there are five people who are a part of this household, although only two of us are living here full time. We would buy five, right? So that's how America is. In other countries, someone would say, "Oh, a lightsaber, that's a novelty item," and they would buy one, and they would maybe mount it on the wall in a movie room or something like that. In America, I'll buy five. A friend of mine who has five kids will buy seven, right? That's how it is in America because we have
Uh-huh.
so much more disposable income, and we have a shopper ethos. Like, if you want something, you don't just buy it for yourself. I was just in DC and I was at the White House gift shop. And instead of just buying something for myself, I bought some things for my two best
Uh-huh.
friends that I go to lunch with all the time. Our shopping format here in America is so we're such huge consumers
Yes. Yes,
that
we
the
are.
only customers they really could sell these outrageous amounts of things, these Legos, I mean, MacBook Pros, Apple devices,
Yes. Yes.
even though they're expensive, most households who have Apple devices have 12 to 15. I mean, just if you look up the information on what we shop, like t-shirts, the average American has 48 t-shirts. You know, you're not wearing 48 t-shirts. I got rid of 20 t-shirts just because I read that article and I thought, this is a travesty. I got to get rid of some of these shirts I haven't worn in 8 years. They have a company that makes blankets out of your old t-shirts so that they don't go to waste. And then it's like a nostalgia blanket with all your old t-shirts. There's nobody else on the
Wow.
planet for China to sell this stuff to. And it's the same thing for Vietnam. Um, we're super consumers. So it's not just that. They make all of our antibiotics. They make a ton of our PPE.
Yes, which is very unfortunate and
It
very
is.
scary.
It's absolutely ludicrous that we would allow them to control something as like having antibiotics is a part of being in the modern world, and it's the reason we have longevity. The reason people died at 45 or 50 was the average lifespan in the olden days is because they didn't have antibiotics. So if you got a toothache, it killed you, right? If you got a cut and it wasn't cleaned properly, it killed you. Um, Giving birth was a horrible experience because most women would die of sepsis afterwards because they had unclean, processes for pulling the baby out. So we should be making our antibiotics in the US. We should be producing our own steel. We should be producing enough oil and liquefied natural gas. All of our core items, these are civilizationally required items we should be producing here at home to a large extent and then buying in the open market just to participate because we can. But China, they are so locked into our economy. They also have a real estate crisis. They've tried to move too many of their serfs and poor individuals into a middle class lifestyle without actually having GDP to support that. Um, they also have a few other systemic issues going on in their culture that really they are very proud, and especially President Xi. That's why they're not at the table right now. They have to prove to America that we are equals and that, we can't force them into doing something that they don't want. They have to find a way to make it look as if it's their idea to renegotiate our trade. But they're eventually going to have to because they're looking at a 40% reduction in port activity already. And that's just at the beginning. As the other countries, the other Asian nations have already put in their bids and they're putting their best foot forward, according to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, they've put their information in there. As that continues to progress and those deals are inked, you're going to see factories go to other Asian countries who are already at the table, and manufacturing within China is going to be reduced. And then there's also the reshoring of some of that activity. Some of the car makers have already announced before President Trump even applied the first tariff, they announced that they're bringing some of their manufacturing back on shore from Mexico and other places. So I mean, it works. Tariff wars are not fun, but the idea here is that President Trump doesn't want to apply a permanent tariff. He wants to apply the tariff as a negotiating tool and then pull
Mhm.
back on it once we have a new deal. We also need to open up some of these markets, especially European markets, to our cars. Canada needs to allow us to sell milk and chickens and any dairy, all kinds of cheeses, wine, all kinds of things that they don't currently allow us to sell there because it would put their people out of business, which is why
Mhm.
President Trump keeps calling them the 51st state. A $200 billion a year transfer of wealth that was $35 billion a year under Trump. The trade deficit with Canada jumped to over $200 billion a year under President Biden. That's unsustainable. So when he says they're the 51st state, goodness knows we don't want them to be the 51st state. Their country is chock full of
Radical Islamist terrorists.
yes, yes, honestly. I mean that's not an exaggeration, Dr. Carole, they got a real problem up there. They got an immigration problem. They have a leftist moron problem. And
Yes.
so we would rather just have, if it was up to me and I was in that room with President Trump, I'd say, why don't we call them another territory? Because they wouldn't be
Uh-huh.
voting. We wouldn't give them senators. We wouldn't give
Yes,
them
that's true.
congressmen, right?
We wouldn't
We
want
would
them to
take
have voting rights because
right,
of,
the conservative, what are they called? They have not states, but provinces.
uh-huh.
We would take the conservative provinces and maybe those three would be one state and they would get 2 senators, those conservative provinces. And then
Uh-huh.
the rest of it would just be a territory, a US territory, where they speak whatever language they like, as long as and they couldn't vote, but they could travel to the United States, because if you're a citizen of Guam, you can come in and out of the United States and, you know,
Uh-huh.
do whatever you want because they're a territory of ours. Same thing with Puerto Rico. Puerto Ricans can come and go as they please. They can do whatever they want. They just can't vote. We need that. That's what we need. Yeah.
Well,
We can't, they
I
can't be
like
a
that.
super
I
state.
like that. I think you should call up the White House and tell them that. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, Canada has been sh so shocking, and now even they had another election, and they still voted for someone who's
Gosh.
a World Economic Forum person.
Yep. That
I mean,
Carney, he's
they
a
don't.
CCP plant. He's a horrible, he's like sold out to the Chinese, like Biden. He's just like President Biden, only he doesn't have dementia.
Well, it really bothers me that people see him. A lot of people. I don't know if it's that people are getting more stupid, or people are are just so distracted, or are so they just believe the media, the mainstream media, or I mean, it seems like things that are just common sense, um, people don't get.
Well, so I saw some people online saying, oh, the Canadian election was rigged because just a couple of months ago, the conservatives were slated to win.
Right?
And then
Yes.
Trudeau decided that he would step down because President Trump had effectively mocked him and embarrassed him. But then he puts Carney up instead. And I was like, what kind of jacked up system of elections do you have there where a person who's slated to lose if he runs again steps down and resigns, and then a person from his party gets to replace him? It just makes me appreciate our system. Whatever we have going on here, at least we know when the elections are. And if someone resigns, their vice president would be the president, which is why we don't have presidents resign here. Like, why would you resign? Because your vice president would take over for you. Why not just write it out? And then in the election, the people will speak like we did this time. We got rid of the Democrats because they were running a candidate who was even worse than her boss.
Right.
So, but in Canada, they can just call a snap election, and that's what they did. And that's how they were able to get a liberal in instead of putting in a conservative. And the worst part about Paul Revere's loss is apparently he's also lost his seat. So he's not going to be a part of it at all.
Well, Well, do you think I was thinking that too, that maybe it was just like the election where Biden didn't really win, but he, supposedly won. Maybe that is what happened in Canada as well. I hope they're going to check that.
Yeah, I hope so too. But you saw what happened when President Trump was not put back in 2020. They were like, if you say anything about it, you have to lose your job. Remember that? Remember people were afraid to talk about it. They were getting
Yes,
banned on social
yes.
media. And I just remember people telling me, they would call the show and try to bait me into saying that the election was rigged.
Uh,
And, I do think it was rigged. I think
I
people
think it was
were in the
rigged
country
too.
illegally voted. And
Absolutely.
I mean, they were counting all night. And you know how we know? Because this last election, President Trump was ahead by 15 million votes.
Uh,
And then California kept counting until that number was shrunk down to, like a couple million.
uh-huh.
California just kept counting for another 4 or 5 weeks. You know what I mean?
Oh.
Like, I was sitting there looking at that and I was like, so for people who made fun of me, are y'all noticing that California, it's the election was 3 weeks ago. I've literally stopped talking about it and
Newsom
they're
is the
still
worst.
counting, right?
Newsom is the worst, but he's going to keep trying to, do everything he can against Trump. Even now, he set aside, I'm sure he set aside, but maybe my listeners don't. He set aside money he's not giving any well, he's giving some money, presumably, to the people who lost their homes, but
Mhm.
he has a big pile of money that he put aside before the fire, to counter Trump on everything,
Mhm.
on immigration and everything
Yeah,
else.
millions of dollars. And
Right.
they're running a deficit.
And now he's not going to take that money. He's not going to take that money and give it to the people who lost their homes. He's going to keep it, earmarked for Trump. Well, we need to take a break. And I want to, we're talking about a lot of things today. And my guest is Stacy Washington, and her book is Eternally cancel proof, a guide for courageous Christians, and not just Christians, people who are spiritual and believe in religion, navigating the political battlefront. And that's one of the things that Trump brought back that is wonderful. He brought back religion in
Or
America.
the ability not to practice. You can practice, you can not practice. Basically,
Right,
just all free again. I love it.
right, right. Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, stay tuned. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Dr. Carol's Couch. I'm your psychiatrist host, Dr. Carol Lieberman. Today we're talking about a bunch of stuff with my wonderful guest, Stacy Washington. The title is Russia and Iran, oh my, how to be happy in a dangerous world, which is now less dangerous because Trump is our president. Stacy Washington is the host of Stacy on the Right on Sirius XM Patriot Channel. She's a frequent guest on Fox News and many other shows. She was the co-chair of Black Voices for Trump and an advisory board member for Veterans for Trump and Women for Trump, all kinds of people for Trump.
All people for Trump. I was on those committees.
Right.
If you were for Trump, I was like, let me come in.
Okay, so let's go. Let's talk about a new thing. This is so wonderful. Um, well, I'll let you start off, but with the part that I like the best, I mean, of course, what it is very important, but I love that it's Melania who brought this to Congress. So go ahead.
All right, so this is something that she's very plugged in on because in President Trump's first term, she was running the Be Best initiative, and that was supposed to help young people to focus on how they could be kind to each other and to lower the incidences of bullying. And it's really important. I think people sometimes dismiss bullying because, if you're Gen X like me, you're kind of like, my parents bullied me, my siblings bullied me. I may have been a bully myself. I don't think I was, but the attitude is, we were tough, we raised ourselves, what's the big deal? But the fact is, bullying is linked to some of the school shootings we've seen. I mean, that Dylan Roof and his friend who wore the black outfits, they were bullied, and that's why they went and shot up their school. And so some of these things can turn really ugly, not just with school shootings, but also, fights after school between children that can sometimes turn deadly. And most importantly, it's the emotional damage that can come from the bullying. And parents often don't know their child is being bullied until it has gone to a place where, there's a serious emergency going on. And so that was her first term focus. Now she's returned and she has this cyber bill. And this one, it has much more teeth than Be Best because Be Best was an initiative, and this is an actual piece of legislation that has just passed through Congress. It's called the Take It Down Act. It passed by 409 to 2.
Huh, wow.
409. That means all of the Democrats, except one or two, actually supported this. This act criminalizes the publication of non-consensual intimate imagery, including images of people engaged in sexual activity of any kind that's AI generated, which these are known as deep fakes. And the legislation requires tech platforms to remove anything like this under threat of Federal Trade Commission enforcement, which is serious, Dr. Carole, because as you know, the FTC, if they get involved with your social media, your television corporation, your podcast, if they get involved, their involvement usually involves shutting you down, and it's very hard to get back on once they shut you down. So this is important. And the deep fakes, so we saw some of it during the campaign where there were deep fakes of Biden's, there were some made of Trump, but they were kind of obviously deep faked political content. They were satirical. But the deep fakes that she's talking about that prompted her to propose this legislation and bring all of these key stakeholders together and have bipartisan support, she's talking about deep fakes that look very real, and it depicts someone who is not in the porn industry engaging in sexual content, and it's especially deleterious. I mean, if it can destroy an adult's life, imagine what it can do to a child to have this passed around their school, and they're saying that's not me, I'm not doing that, and their friends are basically saying, yeah, it's you, or they're poking fun. And then the inability of a parent or that person to be able to say to Facebook, this isn't me, take it down, because they don't have any way to contact them. And also, they never listen when we complain anyway. This is
Yes.
really important legislation. And I'm hoping it'll be groundbreaking enough for them to also be able to use it for public figures who they don't have deep fake activity, but they have images created, but they use your picture and then they take your picture and they superimpose other things over it to make it
Yes.
seem as if you're eating disgusting things, or I mean, you wouldn't believe what internet trolls will do to you if they dislike your political views. I'm hoping that once this is passed, we can see some protection for public figures and anyone who's online who has disgusting things posted about them by people who hate them. Elon Musk is one. He has some, they're just disgusting. And
Yes.
what they do is
Yes.
if you post something nice about Elon Musk over the weekend, I said, thanks to Elon Musk for working for free for Americans, and thanks to Doge. That's pretty lame. Like, that is not my best post. Well, I had one lady who, I don't know if she's a lady or a man or if she's a bot, but she started posting nasty images under that post. Disgusting, horrifying images. And she just would post them every 5 minutes. And by the time I realized she was doing it, she had posted maybe 20. And so I had to block her. Imagine, I mean, I know Elon Musk is a tough dude. He's the richest man on the planet, but he has kids. Some of his kids are 20 and 22 years old, and they have, if they see his name and they click on it and see all that nastiness,
Yes.
I just don't
Yes.
think it's right. I understand free speech, but I also think we should have common decency. And sick individuals shouldn't be able to just make up stuff and put your picture on it. And so I hope that's the next extension of this. But just to protect the kids from the deep fakes and be able to get the content removed, it's really great. I hope people can see that this is something that, well, if it could have happened during President Biden, why didn't it? It's happening now
Mhm.
under President Trump because Melania Trump is spearheading it. And Jill Biden was a teacher. Remember, she was Dr.
Yes.
Jill.
Right.
She did not put
Right.
anything
Right.
like this forward. So,
And her doctorate, I think, was in education, right? Wasn't it?
yeah, she has a PhD in education.
So, yes, and this is really having very, very horrendous effects. As we were talking during the break, there are kids, it's happening, for example, where people do that and then they call up or they contact the child and they say, you know, if you don't, they extort money from people, from teenagers, from adults, from, if you don't pay me this amount, such and such, I will, I'll keep putting this up, or I won't take
Yeah.
it down, or
Or
some
I'll
kind
send
of,
it to your parents.
or yes,
And
or I'll send it to the whole school, some kind of threat. And
yep.
yes, there have been teenagers and even younger who have killed themselves because of these threats. Now, what do you think about and I, by the way, I get people commenting on saying obnoxious things to some of the things that I post, not just political. I mean, sometimes political, um, but sometimes even if, like I say, we talk about Meghan Markle. Even if I put something on about Meghan Markle that isn't favorable, somebody will, put a whole bunch of and it's like whack-a-mole, because you have to see that people are putting these nasty things on before other people copy it. If they put on a post, answer your post, then other people can keep reposting that. So, yes, what did I have? I had something today. I don't know. They pick all weird things that I write. And I mean, not, thank God it's not the majority, but I mean, every once in a while you think, really? What do you
Yeah.
think about the fact that Melania has had such an overwhelming impression on Congress? In other words, so few votes against her. I mean, I'm thinking maybe she should try to make a bill out of I mean, maybe she should bring back, well, she didn't bring it in the first place, but it wasn't passed, the bill to not have trans men in women's sports. Maybe if she brought that in a slightly different way, it would pass.
Well, I don't know. I think this one had bipartisan support because of the subject matter, because it really it defies politics. We all either have children ourselves or are aunts and uncles to children or have friends who have children. We all know how fragile their psyches are. And even the Democrats who seem to think that children have like children are Legos with interchangeable sexual parts, even they can understand that these deep fakes are that children should be protected from them. So I don't think that part was the heavy lift. And I also think, for all of the negative coverage they've tried to put on Melania Trump, she defies it because she is a stunningly beautiful woman who's also very focused on children. She's a great mom to her son, and she really is beloved by a lot of Americans. I know people on the left, she doesn't speak English, and they say all these terrible things about her. But deep down, they know there's nothing wrong with Melania Trump, and they hate her husband, but they can't. I think there's just the undeniability of who she was in the first term. And then in the 4 years when President Trump wasn't in office, she kind of, she retreated from the public eye and spent a lot of time with her son and their family. And when she would come out in public, she was very, just very, very kind of almost hidden. She was there, but not the primary focus. And
Mhm.
then the assassination attempt happened. And
Yes, that's
she
changed everything. Yes,
did, and
go ahead.
I think it changed her. I remember
Yes,
watching videos where the two of them would be in public and their demeanor with each other. You know how it is if you're married, you can kind of see the signs, the unspoken signals between couples. And
right.
I'm not saying they didn't have a good marriage. I think they had a good marriage, but it was different. And then
Yeah.
after he was shot in Butler, Pennsylvania, the next time we see them together, she's coming out in the red double-breasted suit at the RNC. And she looked like she had rolled the clock back 10 years.
Mm.
And she came out smiling and making a lot of eye contact and made her way up the stands and then gave her husband a kiss. And, it was
Yes.
just amazing entrance. I mean, I was sitting there like I was frozen watching it. We were covering the RNC on the radio, and so that's audio only. So I'm taking pictures as I'm watching on C-SPAN, and I just remember posting that she stunned us, like her beauty just stunned us. We hadn't
Uh-huh.
seen her in a while, and then she sat down, and then after that, every time we saw her, when she greets her husband, their standard is he kisses her on the cheek, close to her mouth, but it's not on the mouth. And
Uh,
every time I saw them approach each other after Butler, Pennsylvania, there was something different. And there were other
yes,
moments that night. That same night,
absolutely.
her son, their son, it's Don Jr., so not Melania's son, but President Trump's son, Don Jr., when his father went through there's these family members all seated in those big white chairs at the RNC, and Don Jr. greets his dad. They shake hands, and then he watches him. And as his dad makes his way down, greeting each family member, Don Jr.'s eyes fill up with tears. And you could see
Uh-huh.
by the look on his face, it was a mixture of anger and gratitude because he's angry that someone shot his dad, but he's got gratitude because he's still alive. And it's just all over his face. And all of the family members seem to have that same kind of,
Yes,
we
yes,
almost lost him. And so
yes.
they gathered around him, and it was obvious. You could read it in all of their reactions through the whole RNC. And then after that, I noticed that whenever President Trump and his wife greeted each other, there was just a different energy about it. And I think that's normal. That's natural. Your husband is shot. You think, 1 millimeter and he'd be dead. And you begin to kind of all of the faults, all of the things that you're, quote unquote,
Yes.
working on, all of that evaporates into a sense of gratitude that your husband would do this. And also, I believe, Dr. Carroll, don't you think he had to that weekend? He's in the hospital getting his ear patched up, and his family members begin to arrive, and they had to sit down in a room together and talk about whether or not he would go forward. And he decided to go forward. So that means he had their support. So they decided to
Uh-huh.
support him running, even though they now had proof that people wanted him dead. And there was a second attempt, which the guy didn't get a shot off, but he had the gun at the golf course. And so I think she's different. And
Yes.
and also inauguration day with that outfit, which people are
Well,
calling.
that's a separate story. I don't know about that outfit. I mean, she looks beautiful. She could wear a sheet and look beautiful.
That's true.
But but I want to say something because I totally agree with you. Like uh Trump gives this impression to everybody, that he's tough, that he's made of steel.
Mhm,
And I don't think she ever really contemplated that something like this could happen, that she could lose him.
mhm,
And so it made him more human, more less intimidating.
mhm,
And yes, she it has been more affectionate and so on. And just like he has changed since
mhm,
then, where he seems to appreciate things more.
mhm.
I mean, she's changed in the sense of that he doesn't have to be quite as brash, although sometimes he is. But I mean, um, it's like he like appreciates life more, and you can see
Yeah.
that. And
I think
yes, the
she
fact that
appreciates him more. I to your point, I think
yes,
she appreciates him more. And I'm not saying that because I don't think she appreciated him before. It's not that she didn't appreciate him.
right,
I think it's just different now. Like you said,
yeah,
she actually saw him in a moment because I think for their entire marriage, right, he's been on top. Even when he's
right,
down financially, he's still been on top because he always art of the deal. He manages to pull things through.
right,
And I think their relationship has never been based on any weakness on his part, right? He's the protector, the provider, that
right,
whole thing.
right,
And I think for her to see him vulnerable and that image
right,
of him on the stage, he's down on the ground on the stage, and the Secret Service have piled on top of him. He's been shot, and his eyes are downcast. And the camera person is on the ground and catches him at eye level. And this is the picture that's gone viral. There's
yes.
sunlight shining down
It
behind him.
is an amazing.
And I'm a Christian. I really believe that God speaks to us in moments like that. And I still to this day, he said so. He said he was
Yes,
down there and he changed. He realized things. He felt like God saved him. But I
yes,
know that there are other things that he might never share that went through his mind. I feel like God spoke to him then and told him,
yes,
because otherwise, why would he stand up and wrestle his arms free and lift up his fist and say, fight, 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 if God hadn't told him, you're alive still and you still have something to do. And I think it softened him up
yes,
a lot because he's a tough guy, but it also gave him a resolve that's much different than other presidents. Um,
yeah,
blown by the wind, agenda, blah, 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 blah. He feels like God saved him for a purpose for this country.
right,
And I agree with him.
right,
And I think it's like it's very inspirational. It's something that we can take something from. Not that we've been shot, but that we have a purpose. And we don't have to wait until someone tries to take us out to accomplish that purpose or to work for it, to be committed to it. I
yes,
think it can be very inspirational if you look at it and say, I see him, he's driven to do something for this country. And I need to be driven to do something for my kids or for my marriage, or
right,
for maybe, you're doing something officially in your town or your community or maybe in your state, and you need to be driven for that. To me, it's very inspirational. I sometimes when I see that picture, when I'm online and someone has posted that picture, I just stop for a second and I think about it again, like what was going through his mind when he saw the blood on his hand and realized he'd been shot,
well,
you know?
yes. Well, Yes, I agree with everything that you said. And I also think that clearly he couldn't have prepared himself for that day. He didn't wake up in the morning and think somebody is going to shoot me.
Right.
Um, he didn't prepare as part of his speech. I'm going to say fight, fight, fight,
Right.
but when this happened, and I agree with you about, sort of God speaking to him and telling him, you have to hang in there for, to save America. Um, but also he did it so spontaneously. It was so authentic, and he was telling us, fight, fight, fight. I think he was thinking, I may not make it. I mean, he saw the blood. He didn't know how far the bullet went into his head. He could
Mhm.
have had brain damage or something that would have precluded him from being president. So I think he was saying to us, like, no matter what happens to me, fight, fight, fight for this country.
Mhm. I do too. I do too. And I think, pe people were making fun of him because he had his ear bandaged, but you know how it is when you go to the doctor. It's not like they say, would you like a 2 by 2 bandage or would you like a 4 by 4? They look at your ear and they bandage it up or whatever you got going on, they bandage you up. And sometimes you can get home and after a few days, you can take it off and put something on that's smaller. But at the hospital, they're doing to you what they feel is going
Yes.
to be best for your recovery. I think it's kind of heartless. It's a demonstration of the heartlessness of people on the left that had Biden been shot in the ear, we would have flown flags at half staff. We would have canceled each,
Yes, right.
because he's the president of the United States. They could barely let the fact that he'd been shot go on before they start saying, well, maybe it was faked. Maybe he stood up and said, fight, 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 and he had that viral picture. Maybe he was behind it. He told the guy to shoot him and that's why it missed. That's why he survived because it was a
Yes.
fake shooting, and I had to put up with that for weeks afterwards. People telling me that I was promoting propaganda because
Oh,
President
wow.
Trump was almost killed, and so Dr. Carole, the best pushback is that he's in office right now. And I was in D.C. last week, just running around the West Wing. I was in lower press. I got to attend the press briefing. I did the media row and interviewed Caroline Levitt and Deputy
She's
Secretary.
wonderful, isn't
Oh
she?
my gosh,
She's
she is. I've been
wonderful. Oh,
interviewing her since she left the Trump White House the first time and was running for
uh-huh.
Congress in New Hampshire. This woman, she's mine like a steel trap. She's like 5'4", teeny tiny little dynamo and beautiful in person. Like if you think those pictures are something, just get in like in the face. The face is it's
Uh-huh.
it's doing 150,000 wonderful things, that beautiful face. And so I tell you, this is a great group they have in the White House for President Trump. It's not just that
Yes.
President Trump is great, it's a wonderful group of young people. They're having babies. They've just all recently gotten married and they're working hard and they have all these great ideas and they're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and very exciting. And this is a real opportunity for us as Americans to get some things that we've hoped for and voted for and prayed for and not gotten in the past. And so I hope that people will support the agenda and give it a chance, the same way they gave Biden a chance, give President Trump a chance, and kind of just be grateful because the death of a president, especially by assassination, is a sign that your country is weak and that your country is at war with itself. And so we don't want our presidents to leave office through assassination, whether they are Democrats or Republicans. We want them to leave office peacefully through the peaceful transfer of power after having clean and fair elections, because that is what the longest running constitution in the
Yeah,
history of
country.
nations is. It's the peaceful transfer of power by the will of the people, the consent of the governed. And so I hope that people who don't like Trump, you don't have to like him. It's not like you're going to have dinner with him. I've had dinner at President Trump's house a few times. The man, he serves a wicked good steak, an amazing party atmosphere, great music. But if you don't like him and you don't want to eat dinner with him, that's okay. Just support America being better than it was 4 years ago or 3 years ago or 2 years ago, because President Trump is the pilot and we're all on the plane. And I do not want him going down,
Yes,
because if he goes down, we all go down too. So I felt the same way about
absolutely.
Biden. I didn't support him, but I wanted him to be successful. And he wasn't, but I wanted him to be.
He couldn't be with Obama behind him. But all these people, they're in the mainstream media, they're talking about the 100 days. It's been Trump's had 100 days in office, and they're criticizing this and that and everything. Well, can you imagine if what Kamala's first 100 days would have been like? I mean, America, first of all, we would have more immigrants, we'd have more terrorists in America, we'd have all kinds of it would be going down. We'd be more on our way to socialism and communism and Marxism, and it would just be a horror show. So whatever people may not like 100%, and I mean, first of all, it's only 100 days, give him a break. But second of all, it would have been nothing like this. It would have been going towards the demolishment of America if Kamala had her first 100 days. I mean, that's assuming that Kamala and Waltz. I mean, towards the end, she was drinking a lot. I mean, her laughter was getting louder and louder and crazier and crazier. And so I don't know. If she became president, I mean, she had imposter syndrome. I think we talked about that. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that we dodged a bullet
that was,
there. We dodged a bullet. So the two answered prayers for 2024, that President Trump would be safe and protected from danger. And number
yes,
two, that he would win the election. I actually prayed. I was like, Lord, if I don't get any other gifts for Christmas, can I please have President Trump return to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue for my Christmas present? And
yes.
I know I wasn't the only one who prayed for it. And I know I'm not the only one who felt like if that's all I got, it was more than enough. I got that, and I got some nice Christmas gifts for my family. But I have to tell you, um, dodging having Kamala, she would have finished off what Biden started.
Yes,
And
yes,
we really dodged a
absolutely.
bullet. And I knew
Absolutely.
I knew our time would run out really quickly. This is what happens
I
to us.
know.
Yeah.
I know.
Mhm. Yeah.
We're kind of at the end. Well, please, again, I mentioned that Stacy has a show on Stacy on the Right, a show on Sirius, and also I am looking for the television show. What is the
Oh,
channel the television
it's
show
on
is on?
Salem News Channel
Salem.
every
I
day
I
at
was
4
looking at
p.m.
that earlier.
Yeah,
Salem
Central.
News Channel. Okay,
hmm
good.
And it's Stacy Washington now. It's on Salem News Channel, and I'm so grateful to get to do that and go on Newsmax and Fox. And this is an adventure for me. God has really blessed me to be able to do this because I'm such a talker, and so now I get to, talk and not be in trouble. 12 years of report cards every single year. I was Stacy talks too much. Stacy spends too much time talking. Now I get the final laugh over my teachers because I get to do this for a living. I knew I was going to have fun. Thank you for the scheduling and everything and getting me on the show. Dr. Carole, you're amazing. I'll talk to you again on Sirius.
Absolutely. And you're amazing too, Stacy. And thank you so much for coming on. And thank you all for listening. You've been listening to Dr. Carole's Couch.